practicing to beat somebody. We're practicing to beat everybody.
My expectation is we go out and dominate and create a nightmare and make people never want to play you again.
If you are a fan of another team and your coach is not out there doing everything that Kirby Smart is doing right now, you are already losing. You feel however you want to feel about that.
Nowhere to run and nowhere to hide for 4 quarters. They got to see us in our house for 4 quarters. They got to look us in the eye for 4. This is about us and our family and our house. This is about us. This is our mentality. We ain't backing down. We ain't running. Set a tone, send a message. This is our house. Physical toughness wins in football now. And if you in this room, you got it. And if you come in here, you better believe in it. Because this physical toughness, it's what makes the difference. Elite focus. That's all I'm doing to the guy across from me. I'm fixing to whip his ass. Not in my box, not today. It's about us. It's about our family. We attack. You take that helmet and you strike them. And you strike them and you strike them. That's how you get respect.
Physically, I want to break them.
Another week, another game of the year for the Georgia Bulldogs. The thing that everybody has to remember is that it's a big game because Georgia's in it. We're going to talk about that and a lot more on this week's edition of the How About That Dogs Cast. So this week, it's not Alabama. It's not Tennessee. No, they're coming later in the year. It's not my hated Florida Gators or the Deep South's oldest rivalry, the Auburn Tigers. Nope. This week, it's the new members of the SEC, the Texas Longhorns. Georgia is going to travel out to Austin in a twist and turn in a schedule that I really don't know who Kirby or the Bulldogs made angry, but they just stacked the deck against the Dogs. And hands down, this is one of the most difficult schedules, not only in the conference, but in the country. But it is what it is. And I personally am excited to have the Dogs be able to go play these games. But most of that talk has already taken place. Now, the game is right in front of our eyes. And it's a big one. It's a big one, but not only because Georgia's in it. Because keep in mind that when Georgia plays games that the general college football world views as potentially entertaining or interesting, then tens of millions of people dial that game in every Saturday to watch. Without a doubt, Georgia is one of the biggest brands in college football. And this week, the Dogs are going to be tangling with another big brand in college football in the Texas Longhorns. Who is Texas? Well, they, I guess by any measure, would have to be considered a blue blood of the sport, or at least they have a tremendously deep and rich history. Same number of national titles as the Bulldogs, a couple more conference championships. So these two programs, historically, are right there on par with one another. A couple of Heisman Trophy winners, you get my drift. This year's edition, the Dogs roll in 5-1, staring down the barrel of a potential loss in Austin on Saturday night for their second one, and what is considered to be at least the second toughest schedule when you look at the remaining games they have. So I personally think it's probably the toughest, but some people say it's number 2. So the Dogs are staring down the barrel of what I've referred to in the past as a bit of a crucible. Now, when I speak about the crucible, this game marks the end of that stretch. But what the Dogs have in front of them is no small task. Texas strolls into this game hosting as if the football gods didn't want to make it too easy for Georgia. They send them on the road to Alabama, on the road to Texas, and then, oh, by the way, on the road to Ole Miss to play at the Grove. But this Texas Longhorn team comes in 6-0, ranked number 1 in all the land. And good on them. I think, regardless of what you might want to say about their schedule, which, in fairness, looks a lot different now than it did before the season started. They're 6-0 and they've handled their business. So kudos to them. They're going to be hosting the Georgia Bulldogs. And Georgia, they're no slouches. They do have the one loss. They're coming in ranked in the polls. I believe it's number 5. And the last time that Texas won a game against an AP top 10 team at home was in the last century, 1999. You're thinking, man, that has to be advantage Georgia. Well, you know, the common fan might think that. And then I'm going to tell you this. Georgia, for all of the winning that they have done, Georgia has lost 7 consecutive road games against top 10 opponents. So in a way, something's got to give this Saturday night in Austin. The world, at least the college football world, is going to be watching, and we're all looking forward to it. Now, like I said, Texas, undeniable brand. You look at them, and everybody has a myriad of opinions about them, but the one thing that you can't do right now is look at this team with any sincere thoughts of disrespect. Like I said, they've handled their business. They've beaten everyone that's been put in front of them, and for the most part, they've done it in a way that you would expect them to do it. They've looked pretty good, both to the eye test and absolutely when you start looking at statistics and that sort of stuff. But that's where you have to back up just a little bit, and you have to think about exactly what it is that Texas has accomplished so far. Now, we're going to talk more about Texas just a little bit later, because tonight, the first part of this show that I want to spend time focusing on something that maybe I'm going to have to explain just a little bit. I don't think it's going to take much. But at this point in the year, the Georgia Bulldogs have already started their college football playoff run. That's right. The college football playoff is here. And I mean, it's here right now for the University of Georgia. Now, you might simply look at that and say, well, yeah, Randy, they already have a loss. That means that they're behind the 8 ball. And if they don't win, well, their margin of error is gone as far as getting into the 12-team playoff. Well, that's not exactly what I'm saying, because that's not exactly the truth. Even if the Dogs were to lose this game on Saturday night, which they very well might, it doesn't end their hopes of the 12-team playoff. Shoot, it doesn't even end their hopes of having an opportunity to play in the SEC championship game. But I'm sure that if you've been around, I don't know, Southern life for any extended period of time, and certainly if you've been around Texas football or watched them play, you've probably heard the phrase, the eyes of Texas are upon you. Well, that's a glorious phrase, but for this week, I'm going to spin it and let you know that heading into this matchup, at least from where I'm sitting and everything that I have seen so far in the run-up to this game, I want to let you know that all eyes are on Georgia. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Well, let me lay it out for you. The reason I say that the college football playoff has already started for the University of Georgia is because if you are going to be successful in a college football playoff, whether it's 4 teams, 12 teams, whatever it is, the one thing that we know for sure that you have to be able to do is score the football. You have to be able to walk on the field and know that you can put at least 35 on the board, regardless of who you're playing. Now, I'm not saying that every score in every game in the college football playoff means that you've got 35 points on the board, because you have matchups, right? Styles make fights, but you have to have the ability. You have to be confident that if that's what's needed, you possess the weapons to go get that done. So when we look at Carson Beck and what this Georgia Bulldogs offense has done so far, up to this point, they are, well, maybe underwhelming is the best way to say it. Because I'm not even sure if underperforming is the right phrase. Now, to be completely honest and put all of my cards on the table, in the preseason, I looked at this offense and said the offense is going to be what's rocking and rolling early on. It's going to cover that young defense, let them grow up. I expect Carson Beck and the weapons that are coming back behind an offensive line that was returning 4 or 5 starters and had at least 2 All-Americans on it. I thought, yes, this is where we're going to hang our hat early in the year. I said, I think they're going to average 40 points a game. Well, halfway through the season, the Dogs are averaging about a touchdown less than that. It's like 33.5. There are a lot of reasons for that. This show is not going to go into all those reasons, but I can tick through them pretty quickly. You've had attrition, both through injury, through incident, through bad choices. You've had a melding because you did bring in key pieces that you expected to be able to contribute on the offensive side of the football that are taking longer than we thought to meld together and look the way we thought they might look. Some of this has contributed to the heat that maybe Carson Beck has taken. Wide receivers not running the right routes, not being where they're supposed to be all the time. A run game that, even though Kirby says has been efficient and he's happy with it, is not what Georgia fans envisioned when they thought about explosive running backs running behind an offensive line that, I will remind you again, was returning 4 starters and had at least two preseason All-Americans on it. It just hadn't looked that way. So I'm going to go with underwhelming. That's what I'm going to go with. And at this point in the year, 6 games into a 12-game regular season, so you're halfway through. You're about a third of the way through what you hope you're going to do this year, right? You hope your team makes it to the end, gets through the playoffs, then you're playing like 17 games. So through that metric, we're about a third of the way through. But I'm going to go with halfway through because you're only guaranteed 12 Saturdays. So halfway through the season, I look at Carson and the guys, and I'm like, why are you not getting it done? We could drill down position by position. I could give grades, but I don't want to. Because at the end of the day, I think it's pretty simple. I think it falls right at the feet of that offensive line. I think that offensive line, for what everyone thought they were going to be, a Joe Moore contending unit, a unit that was going to road grade and mash people, a unit that was going to give Carson Beck clean pocket after clean pocket all season, regardless of the opponent. That's really what we had been led to believe. That's certainly what I thought. That's not what we've seen. And when things are out of sorts along that offensive line, whether it's due to injury, whether it's due to miscommunication, whether it's just not strapping your chin strap up tight enough and getting after it the way you're supposed to, which has happened, shockingly, for me, you get the results that we've seen. Now, some people, they just want to blame the coaches and that, but there's way more to it than that. In fact, you would have to give credit from where I'm sitting to not only the offensive coaching staff, but to Carson Beck. And I know that seems like it doesn't make any sense, but when you're talking offensive football, the two people that are the lightning rods and draw the most attention would be your offensive coordinator and your quarterback. Well, I'm just here to tell you that regardless of how messy it may have looked at times this year, those two guys have done a lot to get Georgia to where they are in spite of all of the other issues that have started along the offensive line and then filtered their way out through the other units. And yet Georgia still sits here at 5-1. So the question is, can Georgia, when you look at the rest of their schedule, you definitely have Texas in front of you Saturday, number 1 team in the country, a top offensive unit, the top defensive unit statistically in the nation, sitting right there in front of you. And then you've got Tennessee, who on not in order here, who on reputation is an offense that you're going to have to go score against. And you have Ole Miss sitting out there in front of you, which is another offense that you believe is going to be able to score. When you're looking at that, and you're looking at what Georgia has done so far, then I think maybe this starts to become more clear for you that Georgia's college football playoff is right now. Every player, every coach, every fan should view it that way from where I'm sitting. Kirby, it's weird to hear him talk at the press conferences, especially this week. Not because he's saying anything too outlandish, but because he keeps repeating the mantra that what it comes down to this season, not just for Georgia, but for all of college football, is the long game. Can you survive, get into the dance, and be in a position to win the thing? I'm of a couple of different minds here on this. I think you can absolutely look at this University of Georgia team right now and say, yes, they are better. They are improving. But then you'll turn around and find another area on the team that just makes you scratch your head and not understand why it appears that they might be regressing. Now, I think that's actually a little harsh to say that they're regressing. I don't think that's an accurate word. But if you're simply just passing by the game when you're at the game day party, you know what I mean? And you're looking up at the screen, you're like, man, that doesn't look like the Georgia I know. Maybe you think they are regressing. But again, I'm not sure that even though I do believe that they are improving, because the parts are swinging and missing here, there, and yonder for all sorts of reasons, they're just not in sync. I think that's just, I know it's a boring truth, but I think it is a truth. Now, that takes nothing. I'm not trying to say that the offensive line, the wide receivers, the running backs at times, Carson Beck at times, play calling at times, they've all had their areas where they just simply weren't good. But that just feeds into this thing that gets you an offense that appears to be missing a gear here or there. You know, they're efficient, but they're not what they could be. That's just the feeling that seems to permeate the fan base when we're talking about this offense. And I'm just saying that if we move through these games, you see what's in front of you. Texas on Saturday, then you have Ole Miss on the road a little bit later, then you have Tennessee coming into Athens. The Dogs have to get it right. They have to start clicking, and we have to know, they have to be confident that when they step on the field, they can score. Now, we know that they can score. We saw them in a race to 40 against Alabama. And I want you to remember that. Because for every time that it doesn't look right, there are examples all across the schedule where you can say, no, they can go score. Especially the last 3 weeks, it certainly looks like they're capable of scoring. Here's a number that sort of adds to this equation a little bit, because if you're not really paying attention, it's one that's going to slip by you. And that is that Georgia, up to this point in the season, has passed the football 56% of the time. Now, you know that for the most part, when you think Kirby Smart and Georgia football, you think we're going to run it when we want to. We're going to be physical along both lines of scrimmage, and we're going to play great defense. That's the base. That's the model. We're going to do basic stuff really well, and we're going to beat you up. And this Georgia team has thrown it 56% of the time. And they appear to be leaning into it a little bit. A Mississippi State team last week came into Athens having not been good against the run all season. And Georgia didn't blow the doors off in the run game against that unit. Instead, they chose to have Carson Beck throw it almost 50 times. Now, I'm not sitting here and complaining about that, because I also sat here just a few weeks ago and told you that if Carson Beck is the guy, if he's the guy you believe he is, and you believe that you have advantage in the pass game, let this cat go run that offense. Let him go. Turn it loose. Put it in his hands. Awesome. Great. Maybe that's what they're doing. But you still have to be able to run the ball, and you still have to be able to protect, which is why all of this comes right back to the offensive line for me. Now, this week, I don't expect that Tate Ratledge is going to be back. I think Jared Wilson will be. So we'll see exactly what that means along the offensive line and who plays where and that sort of stuff. But you have to be hopeful that if those guys are coming back, like Wilson is back, that maybe you'll have a little bit more consistency in there. You get a little more push. We'll just have to wait and see. Because when you think about what it is that Texas has done on defense, regardless of what Carson Beck and the offense is doing, well, then you're going to shake your head. When we get to these numbers later, you're really not going to believe it. You're not going to believe just how good they have been so far. But there's probably a reason for that. Again, think about Georgia throwing the ball 56% of the time. 56% of the time. That's a lot, especially if you're Georgia, based on what we know. So that has to be because the coaches realize this is our best chance to win. We trust this guy. But when you do that, communication has to be right. You have to pick up those blitzers. Wide receivers have to get the checks at the line so that when Carson throws the ball out on a screen, you get the check. You're there to receive the ball. You don't run down the field and give the opponent an easy interception, which is not Carson's fault, by the way, right? That's on the receiver. Interception nonetheless, just like what happened against Alabama. Communication is paramount, and the Dogs are on the road this week. So the work being done at practice really, really has to matter this week. Now, there's no doubt that Texas deserves to be ranked number one in the country. They absolutely should be the favorite in this game. What you have to start to think about, though, is, does it matter? Does it matter at all? Does it matter to anybody inside the football program? Can they use it for motivation? Do they need it? I think that's stuff that we fans talk about. I really don't think the team cares at all. Because if we know anything about the program, we know what they do each and every week to get ready for each and every opponent, right? Nameless, faceless. You want to be the best version of you can be. And to that point, Carson Beck and the communication on the offense has to be good. That offensive line must be better. But he's got to have some help. And that's where you look to guys like Trevor Etienne. You look to guys like Nate Frazier, who is expected to touch the ball more this week. Cash Jones. You have to be able to run the football. Now, going back to that communication piece and putting the offense in Carson Beck's hands, one little quick mention that Kirby made during his preseason pregame presser this week was that against Mississippi State, there were looks where if Georgia had handed the ball off on tape, it looks like, yeah, we have more blockers than they have defenders. That run would have probably spit and gone for a big gain. But Carson has the ability to take the snap, make a decision, and sling it out wide if he chooses in certain situations. Because to hear Kirby tell it, that's an extension of the run game for the most part. We're just doing it out on the perimeter as opposed to inside the tackle box. That's great, except when Carson takes the snap, throws the ball out there, you get a yard or two, and he chose to not give the ball to the running back on a play that could have spit for an explosive. There's ups and downs here. That's why any fan who wants to sit back and talk about play calling or any of that stuff, listen, if you're not a coach, if you haven't been a coach, if you haven't hung out in a coach's back pocket for a full football season, then you are better just being quiet. Criticize the team about player acquisition. Criticize the head coach about clock management, right? There are things you can get after them on. Criticize the coach about a willingness for his players to give full effort, that kind of thing. But if you don't know the game the way the coaches know the game, just save it, man, because you just don't know what you're talking about. There are too many variables inside modern offensive football for you to be able to speak on it like you know something. That includes me. That's why I don't do that, because I know that I don't know. But that's me. Bottom line is, Carson has to have some help, and that has to come in the forms of a good run game, or at least an efficient run game, which is the way Kirby likes to talk about it. And if they do those things right, when you have a talented player like Trevor Etienne, the possibility always exists that he will make you right and pop one and turn what should be a 5 or 8 yard gain into an explosive. So maybe this is the week that Georgia cleans up some of those things that they've been having on the offensive line in terms of communication and other things. And, here we go. This is the week that happens. But it's not just the running backs, of course. It's never just the quarterback. It's also the wide receivers. And everybody keeps pointing to Arian Smith. Is he an enigma or is he a true weapon? If he's on the field, you better pay attention, because we know that he can hurt you. Of course, it is well documented that Arian has also had issues being consistent with his hands. Now, I have nothing more to say about Arian Smith other than to say that I'm rooting for the kid. I want him to do well, both for himself and for the Georgia football program. It'll mean good things if Arian's doing well. But especially when you look at the attrition that's occurred in that room, there are still players over there. That is not the problem. But when you have a threat of a run game, when you have an offensive line performing at the level at which they need to perform, and a quarterback having time to make the reads the way he wants to, you have an opportunity for that Georgia offense to do some things. Arian's a part of that. And he needs to come out, play well fast. He needs to get the ball in his hands early, get that confidence rolling, because we've seen that he can do it. But he's not alone. Dylan Bell, another cat that, is a playmaker when given the opportunity. But it all has to come together. And I think the theme that you're hearing here is that so far this season, it just hasn't. And that leaves you with a real question if you're a Georgia Bulldogs fan. There are players here to get the job done. Why hasn't it happened? Up to this point, I could sit here and continue to try to explain and lay it out why I think it hasn't happened. But at the end of the day, anybody who's not a Georgia Bulldog fan is going to look at that and go, you're just making excuses. Now, the people who are here all the time, y'all know I'm not. You guys know that the track record's pretty good about when I tell you something's going to happen. Generally, that's how it goes. But here's what I can say with absolute clarity. We're halfway through the season. 12-game regular season. The Dogs are 5-1. All I know is what you show. And to this point, the Dogs have shown me not enough to give me 100% confidence that they can do any of the things that I believe they're capable of. Georgia hasn't shown me what I need to see offensively or defensively, and specifically along the offensive line and in the run game, to let me think that Georgia is going to be able to navigate Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, maybe even a feisty Georgia Tech at the end of the season. They've been known to score this year. So yeah, Georgia's college football playoff is already underway. There's no need to wait and see if they make it into the 12-team playoff. There's no need to wait and see where they're slotted. None of that matters. If you're a Georgia Bulldogs fan, just go ahead, bust out the black and gold, the colors of the CFP as part of your game day celebration this week. Because Georgia has to be able to score the football, and they have to show up in the way that they have shown up in the past when it comes to their big marquee matchups. If they're going to have a chance to win on Saturday night and then potentially play for bigger things down the road. While we're talking about it, I think here's a good point to mention that in these big marquee games, Georgia's last 7 games against AP top 5 teams, they have gone 6-1, with that one loss being Alabama earlier this year. They have averaged 42.6 points per game. They've only allowed 19.1 points per game. They've put over 500 yards of total offense on the board on average. And they've had a turnover differential of +7. Now that speaks to a couple of different things. That speaks to the fact that Kirby Smart knows how to get his teams ready for big games. That speaks to the fact that when the money's on the table, Georgia's been there. They know how to show up, and they know what it takes to get the job done. We know that they're not going to shrink from the spotlight. There is no stage. Texas, Alabama, the national championship game, too bright for this Georgia Bulldogs football team. At the end of the day, this game, like any other game this Saturday, is going to come down to the execution and who beats themselves. But this is the point where we can sort of start to turn our attentions toward Texas and talk about them a little bit more specifically. Because we know Georgia can get it done. We know that if they are, in fact, in their college football playoff right now, and that, to me, that means they have to be able to score the football. We know that they can, or at least historically they have. Even in the loss earlier this year at Alabama. That should give Georgia Bulldogs fans a little heart, right? That should make you feel good going into the game. Belief, proof of concept. There's a track record of your team doing it the right way, showing up and getting the job done. And it's like I said off the top, another week, another game of the year. It's a big game because Georgia's in it. That's why it's a big game. This week, it just so happens to be the Texas Longhorns on the other side. Now, let's just look at Texas. And y'all know how I get down on this channel. This is not a channel where I'm going to take you through all the box scores. I'm not going to sit here and tell you some statistical breakdown about who and what these teams are. That's not how we do it. But here are a few things that are true. Texas is 6-0, and they have averaged 43.2 points per game in those 6 victories. When people think about Texas, at least the people that I've talked to this week, because I hate to break it to Texas or any of their fans, Georgia hasn't cared about you until this week. That's just the reality. But now that you're here, 43 points a game, 6-0, we look at who you've played. We're like, okay, Michigan's on there. It's a bad team. Mississippi State's on there. That's a weird team. Oklahoma's on there. That's your big rival. 6-0. Kudos. That's great. But here's the thing. None of those teams that I just mentioned to you right there. See, people think there are questions about Texas, offensively and defensively. But why are there questions? They're 6-0, number 1 team in the country. They've handled their business against everybody they've played. Why would you have questions? Pretty simple. The best defense Texas has played this season, that's Michigan. They are the 44th best defense in the country right now. So, almost right there in the middle. Not quite. 44th. So there's no doubt that Texas has a good offensive line. There's no doubt they have speed at the skill positions. There's no doubt that they have not 1, but 2 good quarterbacks. Yeah, they were banged up at the running back position earlier this year, but they seem to be doing fine. They're spreading out the workload. Those 2 cats are like, I don't know, I think they've each got like 260 yards. Maybe there's 3 guys with over 200 yards. They're running the ball just fine. So why do we have questions? Well, you just look at the quality of teams that they've played so far. If you have talent at wide receiver and running back and quarterback and a great offensive line, then you absolutely should be one of the best offenses in the country. In fact, if we're just speaking statistically, you might look at it and go, they should probably be better statistically than they are. But that's why statistics aren't what I hang my hat on over here. You can make numbers say pretty much anything you want to. Now let's look at the other side. The best offense that Texas has played this year, that would be UTSA, the Road Runners, the 67th best offense in the country this year. So, hands down, that Texas defense, absolutely the best defense in the country when you look in terms of statistics, especially against the pass. Holy nutballs. Their numbers, average numbers against the pass are like better than video game good. I think one number that jumped out to me was like the average length of completion that they have allowed is something like 4 yards. It's comical. Now, do you really think that they are that kind of airtight, lock it down, no fly zone kind of defense? If you're being intellectually honest, no. No serious person is going to make that argument. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not talented. They absolutely are. Texas, like Georgia, is one of those teams that, as long as they handle their business in high school recruiting, they should be fine. Like, better than fine. Okay? Because their base state provides them with the opportunity to get players that most states in the country just doesn't offer. Like there's not much of a comparison. There's maybe 2 states, maybe 3, if you really stretch it, outside of Texas and Georgia that produce Division I football players at the same level that they do. So as long as Texas is recruiting fine, they should be fine. They should have players, which is part of the reason, actually, that, people get frustrated with Texas because you've got such a wonderful talent base. How are you underperforming so often? I mean, it wasn't until last year nobody had thought about Texas, didn't care. They had been so bad for so long. I don't know that bad's the right word. They just hadn't played any games of consequence for such a long period of time. But that's different now. Like I said, when they came into the season, I had no issue putting Texas as a Tier 1 team here inside this conference without ever having played a game because of the way they had built the roster since Sarkisian had gotten there, and good on him. That's how they had success year over year since he's been there. That's why they are able to be competitive right now in this league. Now, they haven't really played inside the league yet, so there's that. But I did not doubt that they would be competitive from the jump. So when you look at Texas and you look at Georgia and you understand that styles make fights, and you listen to Sarkisian and you listen to Kirby Smart, they will tell you that these 2 teams are way more similar than they are different. That means that we should come into this thing expecting a really good game, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that these 2 teams recognize. Because, again, the talent base is there. The coaches are there, right? There's no reason that they can't compete and go toe-to-toe with a program like Georgia, who, by everyone's standard, by everyone's measure, has been the standard in college football for at least the last 3 or 4 years. Shoot, Sarkisian said over the last 5 to 7 years, Georgia has been the gold standard. It's what he's trying to build Texas into. And by all accounts, he seems to have done it. But you cannot look at this game coming up on Saturday and ignore the cold, hard facts of who these 2 teams have played. You cannot ignore which one is more comfortable on the big stage. You cannot ignore the fact that I think we know a little bit more about one than we do about the other. Even if what you know is that maybe they're not quite as good as they have been, which is what I said recently. Here's where I think we can leave this thing. Here is where I think we can wind it down. When it comes to Georgia and Texas, you've got 2 top-tier programs that are going to line it up and get after it on Saturday night, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun to watch. When it was Georgia and Alabama, I said all week that this is going to be a coin flip game. I could very easily say the same thing about this game. I expect that it's not going to be a blowout in either direction. Now, I guess you can set your own gauge of what you think a blowout is. But the possibility exists because styles make fights. It could get away from one of these teams. That potential is there. The fact of the matter is that Georgia will not have faced a team that's this balanced, that is this solid from top to bottom in all 3 phases of the game, as they will face in the Texas Longhorns, led by Quinn Ewers, this Saturday. And they have to go on the road to do it. There's also no question about the fact that the Texas Longhorns have not faced an offense with the capability of the Georgia Bulldogs offense that they're going to face on Saturday night, regardless of anything I said about what they've done to this point. I've tried to tell you, it has been a leaky ship for the Dogs. And with that said, they still have the capability to show up in Austin on Saturday night and put a hurt on that Texas secondary. But that can only happen if they can be balanced. And to be balanced, you have to run the football. And to run the football, you have to have good offensive line play. And that brings me right back to where this whole conversation started about what I think is the central defining trait of the Georgia Bulldogs football team so far, and that is underwhelming play by the offensive line. If Georgia shows up and does the things that we all are very, very, very familiar with them doing, Georgia can absolutely walk into Texas and beat the Texas Longhorns by 10 points, 7-10. That can absolutely happen. You are delirious if you think it can't. With that said, if Georgia rolls in there and they look kind of like they've looked all season, then yeah, the Texas Longhorns probably going to win this game, and they're probably going to win it 7-10 points. I would think they would cover if they won the game. I think Texas covers. I don't think they squeak it out. I don't know, as college football fans, if we can expect yet another really good game between two teams where you are really hoping that you're going to have a really good game. Think about it. Georgia, Alabama, that was the first game of the year. That was a good one. I hate that it wound up the way it did, ending on a Hail Mary thrown into double coverage. Sigh, alas. But it did. Then Ohio State goes out to play Oregon. Another great game. We learned a lot about both of those teams on the other side of it, and I think we're going to learn a lot about both of these teams on the other side of it. Earlier, I said Alabama was a proving ground for Georgia, and it was. And I came out of that game actually feeling really good. Whatever. You play tough opponents, you're not going to win all your games. You're going to lose one here or there. That's why you play the game. You hope you win, but you have to understand that they have good players too. Same thing could happen here with Texas. The latest game of the week. I just don't know that we can count on it as college football fans to be yet another barn burner. I don't know that it's going to be a 2-point game, a 3-point game. I just have a feeling that it's going to be more like 7-10. Either way, whichever way it goes, I think that's how it's going to shake out. So at the end of the day, the Georgia Bulldogs are heading to Austin, Texas, to strap it up in front of tens of millions to watch and see. Who is Georgia? All eyes are on Georgia. Texas just happens to be where they're playing. And to be quite honest, the nation has questions about Texas. If Texas wins this game, feather in their hat. That'll be outstanding for them and their program. They will have essentially locked up a trip to the SEC championship game, which would be great for them in their first year in the league. And for all intents and purposes, also a trip to the 12-team playoff. If Georgia wins, well, then everybody's going to reassess Georgia again and figure out, or try to figure out, where do they go from here? Is this a launching point where they just, go nuts on people the rest of the way as they ramp it up and head towards the postseason? Will they meet Texas again in the SEC championship game? Likely at that point, I think you'd have to say. By the way, that's who I picked back at SEC Media Days when I was out in Dallas. I'm like, yeah, I think it's going to be Texas and Georgia. So we'll see. Now, if Georgia were to lose this game, that doesn't sink their season. But it really does. It doesn't eliminate them from the SEC championship game, but it really does throw a kink in them getting there, right? So they would probably still be a 12-team playoff team, assuming they were able to win out. But I doubt they would be in Atlanta for the championship game. But more than that, I just keep hearing Kirby in my head. I keep hearing him say, it's about the long game. He called out the media and he said, look, you guys are going to make this the end-all be-all game, just like you made Alabama the end-all be-all game. But the truth of the matter is, it's not. It's not. And he's right. It's the long game. This is the new NFLization of college football, where Georgia, Texas, even Alabama at this point, you might end up seeing them again down the road. You play once, you play twice, potentially. Then maybe a third time, just like what happens in the NFL. It's very weird. It doesn't feel natural. I don't love it. But if you like the matchup between good programs, good teams, fun games, helmet games, then that's what this game is. I have a lot of faith in my dogs. I'll leave you with that. I'm not making a prediction here tonight. I've got a show tomorrow night where I do that. But this is how I see the game. I know a lot about Georgia. I know they're used to the big stage. I know they're built for these kinds of games. The question is this team the kind of team that they've had in the past? So far, I have to say no. When it comes to Texas, there's a lot to show. You look great so far. You deserve everything you've gotten up to this point. And if you beat Georgia, I will say congratulations. I know this much. Kirby said when he looks at this Texas Longhorns team, a very confident and relaxed sounding Kirby, by the way, on Monday. He said when he looks at this Texas Longhorns team, he sees a team that looks like Georgia's 2021 team, or maybe their 2022 team, in that they are very balanced, they're good in all phases of the game, and that they flat out remind him of those teams. So, if Kirby's telling the truth, if he's right, then the Georgia Bulldogs are not going to win this football game on Saturday. They can't. Because we know what those 21 and 22 teams were. And we know that this team for Georgia wouldn't have beaten either one of those teams. So if Kirby's right, Texas wins on Saturday. So you have to ask yourself, is he playing with a strong poker face? Is he being honest? And yet, he still sort of feels like maybe they haven't seen something like his team. Maybe that's it. Maybe he's not lying to us. Maybe he's saying they're really good, but they haven't seen us. All conjecture, at least for me at this point. And that's okay. I'm looking forward to the game. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've had a good time looking at the Texas Longhorns this week, and I can't wait until they tee it up on Saturday night in Austin, Texas. I also can't wait until you guys move on over. I love having you here on YouTube, but I think a lot of people forget the fact that this is also an audio podcast. So if you haven't checked us out, run on over to Apple, run on over to Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, sign up, follow, rate, review, all that stuff. It does a lot for us. I'd love to see you over there. Also, keep in mind that here on YouTube, where everything starts around this channel, we are steadily growing. Thanks for the influx of all the people that have come in this week. We're on the march to 10K. We popped another marker today. We went over 7,050. That's a cool marker. I like it. The more y'all share this stuff around, the more you move it around, tell your friends about it, the faster we can grow, and I appreciate that. So thanks for being here with us. Make sure you're subscribed. Double check. Make sure you are. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss anything we do. I like to throw this in here too. We do have a sign up for a newsletter. It's in the description here on the YouTube channel. Jump down there, sign up for it. You're not going to get anything from me unless I have something to tell you. No spam, no nothing like that, but you will be the first to hear about really cool stuff when it comes up. Costs you nothing. Go ahead and sign up. I promise you won't hear from me unless it's worth your while. And as I mentioned, tomorrow night, I'm going to be back here with my brother Joe. We're going to do that SEC Powers Hour. We'll pick every game inside the conference. We will look at some of the games in the footprint around here, some national games too. It's a good time. It is by far the most fun show on this channel because it's so interactive with you guys in the chat. And we love to see you. So come on over with us. And if you choose to go above and beyond and support the channel as a channel member, I want to take a second and say thank you to everybody who does that. You make what we do possible. But even if you don't want to do that, just like, follow, share the stuff around. It does more than you know. So Georgia and Texas, this week's game of the year. It's a big game because Georgia's in it. And oh, by the way, the number one ranked Texas Longhorns are on the other side. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Should be a good game, and I truly believe that when we come out on the other side of it, we are going to know more about both teams than we know right now. And if Kirby's right, and this is about the long game, well, that information we find late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, well, it could be way more valuable than any of us can comprehend right now. Until next time, you guys take care of yourselves, take care of each other, take care of your families, your friends, and go Dogs!